The end of July isn't the end of summer, but the leaves are drier, the cicadas louder. That means autumn and time to think about the end-of-year retirement planning. Here with some tips to think about specifically, federal retirement expert Tammy Flanagan. And golly, if you're planning to retire in December, here it is nearly August, you really got to be on the ball at this point.
Exactly. Yeah, I guess the planning really should have started, a long time ago, but when you're really ready to set the date and turn in your application, some people think, well, I could wake up on Monday and just call in and say that was my last day on Friday. But if you do that, you're going to wait longer for all your benefits to come into play. So it's always a good idea to look over the applications, make sure you have all the documents that you need to attach, make sure you understand, what the questions are on the application, because there are some important decisions you have to make. And then when it is time to turn in the application, talk to your HR specialist and they can tell you how much notice they need, because it can be anywhere from 30 days for a small agency to as much as 6 months for a really large organization, because they're going to get a lot of retirements at the end of the year, especially in those larger organizations. So you want to be at the top of the queue. When they start working on those end of the year applications, you want yours to be right up there.
It's also more professional, isn't it, in some sense, to give people good, solid notice of your retirement if you care about the organization.
Yeah, you would think so. I remember when I worked at the FBI, this was years and years ago, but I would have applications be under my door in a sealed envelope with private, secret, don't tell anybody I'm leaving. Because I think once the office knows that you're on the way out, they treat you a little differently perhaps. But definitely tell your supervisor you're leaving and give HR some notice, because they've got some work to do.
All right, so you submit your retirement application to HR. What about your supervisor? What role do they have?
It depends on the agency. Some agencies will say, we need 60 days notice. In your position how long it's going to take to hire a replacement, to train them perhaps. So you want to give them some courtesy that way. But I don't know that there's any law or hard and fast rule that you have to give that notice.
And processing of the retirement claim, that varies, I guess, by season, by year. What are we looking at these days from OPM?
Yeah, it does vary. It varies based on a lot of different places along the way of the application, beginning with you. So whenever you fill out the application form, make sure you answer every question. Make sure you answer it correctly. I had one guy who told OPM by answering a question, it was a yes or no question, do you get a military retirement? And he said yes. And then they said, are you going to waive it? And he said no. But he had a reserve retirement. He doesn't have to waive it. And based on the answer that he put on his application, OPM gave him a hard time about giving him credit for his active duty time while he served in the reserves, which was really a long process to get corrected. So be sure that you look that thing over, have maybe somebody else look it over with you. If you're fortunate, you'll have someone in HR that will go through it and make sure that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's on that application. And then your HR has work to do. They have to kind of take apart your personnel records, get your health benefits ready to transition, life insurance, and also all your personnel file. Your records of your personnel history have to match up with what you've done. So if there's any missing documentation, that right there can cause a major delay. And then it goes into payroll. Payroll's got to get you off the payroll. They've got to send the retirement contributions that you've paid to your agency to OPM. And so depending on how long it takes them to do their processing, that can also be a delay. There have been some payroll offices that have delayed that by 5 or 6 months, which is incredibly long, in my opinion. It should really happen within 30 days, but it doesn't always work that way.
Sure. And the more places you've worked, the more complicated your retirement calculation. And if you've left government maybe and come back, all of these things add complexity and therefore time to figuring out that final annuity.
That can add time, but as long as everything's documented appropriately, it shouldn't be too difficult. What else can add time are things that can take longer to process, such as a court order. So if you've gone through a divorce and your former spouse has been awarded a portion of your retirement or survivor benefits, it has to go to a whole nother office at OPM, the Court Ordered Benefits Branch. So that's going to take longer. If you're retiring under special provisions like law enforcement, firefighters, those have to go to a special branch to be processed by the specialist who does those types of applications. So all these things can add up to a longer processing time. But that's not to say that some people will have their first retirement check the month after they retire, although that's pretty unusual. Usually takes on average 90 days to process an application. That's after OPM receives it. So count on there being a bit of a wait, a transition period, so to speak, while you're getting ready to start getting those checks in the bank every month.
We're speaking with Tammy Flanagan. She's a principal at Retire Federal and knows about these things for many years' experience. And sick leave, annual leave, if you retire at the end of the year and say you haven't taken a vacation, you get all that at that point?
Yeah, so your annual leave, whatever you've carried over from last year, whatever you've accumulated and haven't used this year, whatever hours you have, which could be as much as for many employees up to 448 hours or more if you have a higher carryover limit, that all gets paid to you in a lump sum. And again, that's not coming from OPM, that's coming from your payroll office. So hopefully it's going to come within a few pay periods after your retirement. And that should help tide you over while you're waiting for those regular retirement checks to come in from OPM, because it can be a pretty substantial check for someone who has a lot of hours of unused leave at the end of their career. Now, your sick leave, that's going to be converted to time. So if you have, let's say, 1,000 hours of sick leave left on the books, that's going to give you another 6 months or so credit to your retirement calculation, which translates to about 0.5% of your high three for the rest of your life. So there is some monetary value to your sick leave as well.
Interesting. And this is not all a secret. I mean, OPM publishes lots of information for would-be retirees.
Absolutely. They've recently come out, this year it was updated. They call it a retirement quick guide. And it does give you some really helpful hints about things you should do before you retire. Understanding these choices about survivor benefits, naming a beneficiary, continuation of health and life insurance. So if nothing else, review this. It's a 3-page guide. It doesn't take you too long to go through it. And if you look at it online, it'll give you some links to some of these areas that you might have additional questions on. So that's a good place to start, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a local HR specialist to help you through the process. Look at the information that is on OPM's website, because you'll find it to be pretty useful.
All right. Well, that's good advice. And speaking of retirement, people will eventually be withdrawing from their TSP. And now there is a new L fund.
There is.
You've taken a look at this.
Brand new L fund, but it's not for the people getting ready to retire in most cases. It's the L2070 fund. Can you believe that? L2070. And this is based on people who were born in I think 2000, because if somebody was born in the year 2000, believe it or not, they could be working for the government right now, and they'd be 24 years old, and that L2070 fund might be about the target date for their retirement years. So this is probably for our youngest hires that's coming on board, but it's going to be a really aggressive fund. It's going to be almost 100% stocks, and it will gradually shift to the more conservative mix of investments by the year 2070. But for many years to come, you're going to have the advantage of the fluctuations of the stock market, which is volatility, but that volatility can generally result in an upward trajectory of those compound interest rates, which you want early on in your career. You can afford the risk because you have plenty of time to overcome a downturn. So that's a new fund. And of course, next year, the L2025 fund will disappear. It's not going to disappear entirely. It's going to be rolled into the L income fund, which is the most conservative mix. Just the opposite of the 2070 fund. It's mostly G and F fund, and really mostly G, and very little, I think it's maybe 20%, 15% stocks in that L income fund.
So the L fund, then, a given L fund series, starts out as an aggressive investment vehicle, and over time it sort of devolves as the wave settles down into mostly G fund.
It does. And that's to eliminate someone from having to make those decisions about when do I reallocate, how much should I have in the C fund or the S fund. This kind of makes that decision for you based on a professional mix of investments based on your time horizon. Now, some financial planners might say it's maybe too conservative